Behind the Shades.
You made a good point when you mentioned the discrepancy between the classes and maybe even to a smaller degree culture. I wasn't breastfed as a child, but growing up, I grew up in a poorer situation than I am now. If I
Mhm.
were to have children, I would prefer
Mhm.
the mother of my children to breastfeed. But I can understand that if you're lower class, lower middle class, or if you're near that poverty line, you have to make a decision because the job is much more valuable to you versus someone, as you mentioned, who's wealthy and they can afford to take the time off, or they can afford more access to resources that maybe some of these other women don't have. So that's why
Right.
I think, even though, as you mentioned, there's more research that needs to be done, that's probably why it's more accepting in certain groups of people because they don't necessarily see the immediate effects, if any,
Yeah.
versus another group that it's, well, my grandparents did it this way, my parents did it this way, and I'm doing it this way, and everyone turns out fine.
Right. Well, the turning out fine thing, right? It's a double-edged sword because then you have the parents or the grandparents, right? The new grandparents that are coming in being like, I fed you from the bottle, you turned out fine. And so coming in and affecting, your goals, like maybe you want to try to do it differently, but everyone else who is that older generation didn't do it that way. And it can be really hard and a lot of pressure because they then feel judged because you want to do it different. And it's a really complicated thing. And so having some of those discussions ahead of time with those relatives and partners, right? Like you said, it would be your choice, like you would prefer if they breastfed, but you have to think about like, well, what if they don't want to breastfeed? That can be a challenging conversation. Um, and additional pressure on someone who has to spend a lot of time and effort in their body feeding a child. Um, there's so many dynamics in here, but the money is a huge part of it. We need to pay women to breastfeed. I'm not even talking about paid leave, which we don't even have. Most places, most places in the world have paid leave, and we don't. And it is about, we're told how much healthier our child is with breast milk. We're told how much better it is for society. We're told that it's better for our hospitals because our medical care will be lower because people are breastfed, and so they're not going to have some of these ailments. Yet we want mothers to do it for free and are even punished, because we lose jobs or, we have to choose to quit our jobs to do it. And that's actually what happened to me is, let's bring COVID into the conversation a little bit, because there's been a lot that's interesting in good ways for some people, but I think it's divided this bridge a little bit economically as well, or a lot. For me, when COVID hit, I had a 3-year old, a 3.5-year old, and a 9-month old. And I had only been back to work about 8 weeks. And COVID hit, everything shut down. My husband and I were trying to work from home together with 2 kids. And I was nursing my daughter 3 times a day and pumping for my son 4 times a day, and then supplementing with formula as well. And the problem is, my husband couldn't do the pumping, right? He could feed the bottles, but he couldn't nurse my daughter. And so when it came to us looking at each other after about 8 weeks, going, we can't do this anymore, I had to be the one to quit. Like it was not even a question because the bulk of the labor was still on me that he couldn't do. And um, so what happened in COVID is thousands and thousands of women quit their job because, like me, well, first of all, I also made less, right? And so, like other women, you're making less, you're nursing, it's going to be us that leave. Um, but then what also happened were pregnant women in 2020, 2021, they got the benefit, if they worked office, white collar jobs, of working from home. My sister-in-law, for example, she's never been away from her son. She had him, had maternity leave, and then she has worked, as she and her husband have both worked from home their son's entire life, and he's almost 2. So they've never experienced having to put him in daycare and being separated from him. She could just nurse him and then hand him off again. And that separation that those of us pre-COVID had the experience of, a lot of women have found themselves not bothered by that. They've been able to continue and meet and reach and go beyond their goals because of that. But now let's look at the other side of COVID, right? Lower income families where they didn't have, and they still don't have the ability to work from home. They have to go into restaurants, into grocery stores. They have a job where they have to be there physically. So now not only were they putting themselves at risk of COVID, but they're still having to have that separation. And so we're going to continue, as we see data, we're going to see bigger discrepancies there. And, it's a big, big problem that we still haven't figured out how to fix, right? We can keep throwing money at the problem, but the reality is it comes back to giving money to the families so they can do this work, because it's a job, a 24-hour job.
That's something that many people either missed or maybe they didn't want to see it, because I work in a white collar job, and many people in that job who had children, it was like they didn't miss a beat, because if you had children in this type of job in the last, let's say 2 years, 3 years, you were always with your child every single day, because for the most part, you're working from home. As
Yep.
you mentioned, right? You gave birth to your child at home. The mother went on maternity leave. The father went on paternity leave, and everyone's at home. So the child didn't even see the inside of a daycare. Whereas I know some people, as soon, they even here in Canada, you get 18 months maternity leave,
Yeah.
right? That's the max. Everything else is like unpaid, but you get pretty much 18 months. So some people did the 12, maybe some did 18, some did the 12, and their child was in daycare during this. So their child would go there. And
Yeah.
anyone who has children, daycare, you pick up every single virus
Everything.
in the world. So they're going and coming sick, temperature, high temperature, fever. And where I am, let me tell you, Erin, if a child has a fever that is elevating, not that it's at the threshold where they actually send you
Oh
home,
yeah.
they're sending you home. And now the
Yep.
mother, the father has to say, okay, Mrs. Harris, you take Monday off. Mr. Harris takes Tuesday off, and someone has to compromise. It's tough.
Exactly. Well, and that's why I didn't expect to take off more than I did. So my job, I was a college instructor, and so I went kind of semester by semester. And I was supposed to work that summer, and I said I need to take. I can't do summer. And then I realized that we were continuing on virtually, and my children's daycare was on campus, and I knew it was going to continue to be closed. And I was like, we can't keep doing this. It was so much. And so I became a stay-at-home mom. And yeah, their first time sending them back to daycare was terrifying, because you don't know what you're getting. And when they first went back, there was such rigid rules that if they had even a runny nose, they couldn't come back for like 72 hours. And so even then, when I was thinking of going back to work because they're back in daycare, it wasn't realistic, because yeah, he was going for the first time, my son, and picking up everything. And then yeah, being terrified they're going to get COVID, right, and bring it home. And so it's exhausting. It's so exhausting. And that was another thing too. Actually, I hear stories and see a lot of women who continue to nurse longer than maybe they would have, to keep those antibodies, especially before the vaccine came, or the child's vaccine, right? That came out not too long ago, a few months ago, under 2, and or actually under 5. But moms who had maybe gotten the vaccine and then knew that their baby was getting the benefits of the vaccine through the breast milk. So they continued on even further than beyond a year.